All right. So we're gonna get right into it today. So obviously, first things first. For those of you guys that don't know, my name is Jose. We're running up the ACES community over here. We wanted to really go ahead and start doing these free calls every single week to just give you guys some content to go into, kind of see like how we do things, and also like have an understanding of the trades that we call out in the chat. So I think this will be a good little series for y'all to tap into. And yeah, so today we're gonna be basically going into the previous trading week, right? So obviously today is, May 26th. So we're gonna be going into the trading week of the 19th to the 23rd. And basically all the trades that were called out in the group chat, really breaking them down. Kind of just taking lessons from them as well, right? Because I think it's a really important thing to do as a trader to be able to know how to, not only like, take your positions and stuff, but how to really evaluate them to make sure that, like in hindsight, to see what maybe you could have seen better, where you could have potentially had better potential actions, right? Whether that be, taking partials earlier or whatever it might be, and we'll go into that and stuff like that here. But um, but yeah, so the other piece of what I wanted to tap into as well is just kind of like a bit of a review into like, what we really do here, right? So obviously, we're all about reading market manipulation, and market manipulation is all about just having an understanding of where the masses are looking to, take positions and where they basically get stopped out by manipulation, right? I mean, anybody who's experienced in the market has probably seen stop hunts, right, where they're going for to hunt for stop losses, happen, right, in real time, right? I'm sure everybody's experienced that. So really, we look to study that. We look to understand it at a higher level, in order to again really make decisions inside of this financial market that aligns not with the masses, but with the people who are manipulating the market, right? So yeah. So first things first, we'll go ahead and just kind of go into our review of last week here in terms of like our breakdown. So I'm gonna now share the screen here on the Discord. All right, and you guys should be able to see this now. So as you guys can see, we had like all of our trades from last week happen, and this was pretty much the ending of our first week. So we had a couple trades on indices, couple trades on currencies. We had about 5 out of 8 call outs that were either one winning or break even, right? And then total pips that we caught was about 466, and total RR was about 7.5 R, right? Obviously, the big win that we caught last week was NASDAQ, which really allowed, a really, really good, week. To be honest, we didn't really need to stress too much after that, or like, take any more like, big positions or anything like that. So yeah, we'll go ahead and tap into first like these US 30 ideas. So these two were on Monday, right? This one over here was Tuesday, I believe, right? These two here were on Wednesday. This one was on Thursday, and then these two here were on Friday. All right. So as you guys can see, like typically what we're trying to do is, and what I believe a lot of you guys should be doing as traders is putting yourself in a position to take trades and take positions that like are just fully aligning with your entry model and with what you're looking to look for. And in order to do that, we got to really limit the amount of trades that we're taking, right? So, what I like to do every single week is go for a max of, 10 trades in a single week, right? Most of the time we'll end up taking even less. So that'll kind of average out to like, 1 to 2 positions a day. Or, sometimes we won't take any positions for that day, right? But just kind of depends on what the market really presents and what we're looking for that week. So yeah, let's go ahead and start with US 30 real quick. All right. And we'll kind of break down like the buys first, kind of the idea of like what we were thinking here with US 30 to start out the week. And we'll also do like a little bar replay over here to bring us back to the Monday where we took our trade, right? So over here, right, with US 30, one of the main things, and let me just go actually into a US 30 that we haven't marked up over here. So we can go ahead and look at this a little bit better. Awesome. So yeah, so basically with US 30, right, one of the main things that I was paying attention to was the way how we had been, really, obviously we've been on majority of the time we've been on an uptrend, but I've just really been seeing how we haven't been coming back into areas of imbalance, right? So, we had like areas of imbalance down here, right? We had areas of imbalance down here, right? I think on other brokers, this right here is like an actual gap in the market, which for me is like really, really strong imbalances, right? Versus just having a candle there, right? If we go to, like the original one here, we can see that the market actually opened, right? Sorry, the market closed on Friday, and then when it opened on Sunday, we ended up having this huge jump. And this is the week before the current trading week, right? So during that whole previous week, we never went ahead and filled this imbalance, right? We kind of just came down to this one and then reacted from there. So I was really expecting price to get back into this gap. I was expecting price to also get back into this gap down here when I was going to go ahead and take the position, right? So let's go back over here. So there we have our two imbalances, right? And then we were kind of noticing how, inside of these highs that were being created, right, we were seeing some potential signs of manipulation, right? So specifically within these two highs, right, one of the things that I had noticed was we were showing signs of distribution here both times, right? So we end up seeing how price here we had like signs of distribution on the lower time frame here in the side of this high, right? And this would be kind of like our three drive push to the upside there. That's showing that distribution, right? And then obviously we reaccumulate, and then when we end up having this second high over here, I was also looking at this as potential signs of distribution to basically look to bring us down, right? So we had first drive, second drive, and this would be like our third, right? And then obviously aligning with this too, we had other pairs like, NASDAQ and stuff like that. So if we go ahead and look at NASDAQ kind of at the same moment, right? NASDAQ had also kind of created this right over here, right? NASDAQ had also kind of created this incredibly impulsive move from here to here, right? Just like how US 30 did in that same moment, right? So we'll go back here to this right here. So this is basically the same moment where US 30 from here to here had such a huge buy, take place, right? And so this is really like when I talk about this whole idea and concept of market manipulation, this is really what we look for, right? We look for moments where, price really with intention, right? With intention, will go ahead and attack previous highs and lows, right? So we could see over here, like before that push to the upside, right? If we go ahead and draw an arrow from this high over there, right? We will basically see like how before this huge like impulsive move happens, right? Before such a large amount of buyers is put into right here, we're previously respecting that high, right? And that for me is like potential signs of manipulation, especially when it's like so strong, so impulsive, right? Compared to any other, points in price, really, right? These are where we can really start to see like tops and bottoms get created, is when we see price action like this one, right? So basically the idea just being that, we were looking for the market from there, like now to go ahead and like we're obviously like inside of a distribution phase because of the way that the highs are being created. And I was also noticing how, when we look down at these lows over here, especially these recent lows, right? I really thought that zone here could be a potential area of liquidity, right? For me, when I see like a big wicks like this one, like where there's not really like too many candles in this price level, right? Like it's literally like we're just coming in there, bouncing really aggressively, right? Coming in there, bouncing really aggressively, coming in there and bouncing really aggressively without really creating those actual institutional candles that we want to see. Versus like when we see our push to the upside, we have a lot of candles, right? These are, mostly candles that are pushing to the upside, especially when we go to some of these higher time frames as well, right? Like 1 hour time frame, 2 hour time frame, right? We have a nice candle sitting above as well, right? And even on the 2 hour, we can kind of see how these are wicks, right? So for me, it just wasn't really there, like, it was looking more like the distribution was taking place when we have that kind of price action, right? And then we end up seeing price, pretty much like come down, kind of tap back into those lows here again, right? And we make these lows like really, really equal here, right? And that was one of the first things that, really got me looking at this, where I was like, okay, not only do we have like this big gap down here, right? Like that we talked about, right? We can see here like on the 2 hour, 4 hour type of time frames, we have such a huge gap. But now we also have a point of liquidity that's sitting just above that gap, right? So for sure, we're going to end up seeing price at least break below that zone, right? Get us back into the gap, right? Because if we're creating liquidity here, it's because we're doing that with the intention of going ahead and reaching down into the imbalanced area, right? So that was kind of the idea that I was tapping into for this, right? And so, yeah, so I'll go ahead and just real quick and just kind of compare this to, the idea here. I'm just going to bring in the schematics here, right? So obviously this was a little bit more of us like seeing that bigger time frame wise, we're, creating potential distributions, right? So for example, over here we have like our two types of distribution that we want to pay attention to, right? So the first one that we have is obviously, hold on, let me bring this over here, right? So the first one that we have is we obviously have one that ends up having like three drives to the upside, right? Just like this, right? But the second type of distribution, obviously, that we can have is where we only have two pushes to the upside, right? We end up creating like a point of interest there, right? And then from there, seeing price go to the downside, right? And this is where, obviously distributions can get a little bit tricky, right? Especially when trying to figure out what phase we're in the higher time frame, because we don't really know whether we're going to have two drives or whether we're going to have three, right? So really, like when it comes down to it, right? This is why things like risk management and trade management is really really important when playing these Wyckoff schematics because it might take multiple attempts to actually take advantage of the actual move, right? So keeping that in mind, you want to obviously do things like move stops to entry, take partials early when you get reactions and stuff like that, which we I feel like we did really really well this week, and we'll tap into just now. But yeah, so in this example here, what I was thinking was that we might have potentially had our BC, which is kind of that initial high, the UT, which is like that big buy up that I was, really highlighting to you guys before, right? And then, we end up seeing like another point of interest get created to potentially be like an LPSY. So I was potentially looking to take advantage of it here, right? This was kind of my thought process to then go ahead and see price continue to the downside. So this was kind of the situation that I was thinking about for that first potential position, right? And then, we end up basically seeing here how we had like, I was looking at this as our potential UT, right? Our second drive above the highs, right? And then we end up having price creating a pretty nice area of interest right here, right? So, we can kind of see how there was this potential zone here, right? We can see like these two highs right here that kind of get created, right? And then here on the 15-minute, right, we end up seeing like just literally one candle go ahead and poke above those highs. That's exactly like the type of manipulation I would want to see, right? Same thing over here, like on the 30-minute. Although like the wick here does the damage, we definitely still see like one clean candle that's going ahead and poking above that previous high, right? And so, yeah, that's why that zone really like, was of interest of me. So I was thinking, all right, maybe we can end up seeing again, like this end up being a UT, this end up being an LPSY, we trade down, right? We do another LPSY, and then we finally break below the range, right? So that's kind of how I was playing this. Obviously, it's what we would need to do though is like since we're here on like a 30-minute time frame, right? With our specific entry models, we need to wait for the full entry model to really take place, right? So even though I had like a potential Wyckoff like point of interest here, right? I ended up waiting for a potential lower time frame sign of weakness for me to take the trade, right? So, I would really label this as like a kind of a mix between like a type 2 and a type 1 when it comes to like our entry models, right? So, over here, type 2 obviously being like a Wyckoff entry model, right? And I think that we really did have, some signs of that schematic really taking place, right? We had price staying in a pretty nice range, right, as a whole, right? And then, we're really just coming up and manipulating highs. And then same thing, kind of like bigger time frame wise as well, right? So that was kind of like, my thought process with the trade from a Wyckoff point of view. And then from a five phases point of view, well, I was looking at this as like, okay, we have an area here where I would potentially want to play from. I don't like just because I see a nice 30-minute candle, I don't just take a trade because we have a good potential zone there, right? What I want to do now is I want to take advantage of what we call the fractal nature of the markets, which is basically where we go ahead and we analyze the lower time frame as we tap into our potential higher time frame zones. So here we're in the 30-minute time frame. We tapped into our zone here, right? I'm going to go ahead and bring this back here, just so we can really see what happens as we tap in. And obviously nothing here yet, right? There's really no reason why I should be looking to sell just yet, on this position, right? And then we'll go ahead and let it play out. You guys can see what ended up happening, right? So here we could see here on the 1 minute time frame, right? As we tap into that zone, now we can see, oh, well, we're having a potential five phases manipulation here as well, where we have these previous highs here that are being created, right? We have this one huge impulse to the upside, and then we end up selling off very aggressively, right? With like some very nice imbalances being created as well, right? So that's really, really what I want to see a lot with, these five phases type of setups is like imbalance being created, structure shifting, institutional candles being created, liquidity being taken. And so that was what really like had me put my eyes on this potential position. And so I think that was like right around here, right? And then I think like that 1 minute candle there was also a really nice 3 minute candle. So that's another, point of confluence that I want to see is like not only do we see like that sign of manipulation on the 1 minute, but also on the 3 minute, we end up seeing a very clean candle where it's just like one candle comes up and then the next candle goes ahead and engulfs, giving a potential really nice institutional candle. And then same thing here on the 5 minute, right? And so this is where we can really like look at it and be like, okay, well, we're really starting to show those potential signs of manipulation in this previous zone because this is why I say I look at the 5 minute, 3 minute, and 1 minute because very often we'll end up seeing setups just like this one, where all those three time frames will all have those signs of manipulation, basically at the same time, right? So yeah, so I think like this is let me check exactly what time I took this trade here. I'm just gonna share here. So we can see that this trade was taken at exactly 8:15 a.m., right? This was what the chart looked like. And as you guys can see, it's exactly what I'm telling you guys about, right? We had that zone there, right? We had, this previous area of interest here that we were paying attention to. So we are like, okay, this can, qualify as a five phases setup. So, for me, again, it's like, I really like these kind of positions, right? And it obviously is like, it is a perfect example of the entry model, right? So whether I win or whether I lose, I would say even just now in hindsight, like, we definitely waited for the right confirmations that we wanted to wait for, right? We kind of had the bigger time frame idea with the potential Wycoff schematic. We brought that down to the smaller time frames, right? We noticed how we had like a 30-minute candle in this point of interest and stuff like that, 15-minute candle as well in this point of interest. And then we scaled into that smaller time frame and we waited for those candles to happen, right? One thing I want you guys to understand too, especially when it comes to like really analyzing lower time frame price action, is that there's going to be a lot of noise, right? So how can we like that's what the lower time frame is. There's going to be a lot of noise on it, right? So how can we go ahead and like kind of filter out that noise? And the best way that we can do that is by making sure that other candles that are also on the smaller time frame again are also aligning with that same bias, right? So kind of looking at the 15-minute, looking at the 5 minute, the 3 minute, the 1 minute, right? We can even see here on the 15 minute, we had a zone where when we actually like brought ourselves up into that area, right? We could see this candle has a trap candle and then the next candle has no wick, right? So that's something that we really like to see for potential institutional candles is big bullish moves up, right? And then reactions, back down after that. So this had a potential also institutional candle on that 15-minute, while we also have an institutional candle on the 5 minute, while we also have an institutional candle on the 3 minute, and then the 1 minute as well. So pretty clean, if you ask me, right? I think all you guys could probably see why that is, pretty clean. So yeah, so then from there, right, what are we looking to do? Well, we're looking to take our position basically inside of this zone, right? I believe it was called out at 42,410, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check that. 42,400. Okay, so a little bit farther down even. right? I guess because like we had to call it out a little bit late, but the idea really was inside of here, right? And then that was at about 8:15. So where is 8:15? Right, so we're about 2 minutes away from 8:15. Two. Okay, that's probably why we did 400 because 15 we already kind of like had this big reaction down off of that zone. So yeah, so it makes sense there. Right, so it looks like we went off of here. And then yeah, so really um but I know my entry was better, I'm not gonna lie. My entry was up here because I know that we had already hit 1 to 2 when we came for these lows here, right? And this was kind of another piece of what I was looking to target was like this potential equal lows that were sitting down here before we shot up, right? And I think 1 to 2 is like somewhere down here somewhere. Right. And I know there was opportunity to get like a better entry as well. Like we did have price, retrace back up and stuff and then in the next minute or so. Right. So right over here as well. So to get that actual, extreme area entry, right? And yeah, and so obviously, as you guys can see, where did I put my stop? I put my stop loss just above this previous high. Because if this is our initial area of interest that actually like, broke previous lows, well, then that's the zone we're going to want to have our stop, right? As a rule of thumb for our 5 phases setup. And then, from there, obviously looking to target, potential 1 to 3s, right? To push us down. So yeah, so price ended up playing out pretty nicely for us, right? As we could see here, right? So, we ended up having a really nice reaction down. We were pretty much up around 84 pips or so at this moment, right? So being up about 84 pips, while risking about like 41 pips or so, we were up about 1 to 2 risk to reward, right? So, typically for me, like, when it comes to trade management, stuff like that, right? Obviously, first and foremost, like if we have news events or if we have like New York session open or London session open that's coming up, I definitely want to be looking to take partials and move stops to break even, which is exactly what I wrote in the chat as well, right? So as we can see right here, right? We'll go ahead and go back here. So yeah, so since we're 15 minutes away from MY Open, right? So at about 9:16, we called out partials, for this potential position, right? So price, reacted really beautifully, came towards these lows here that we were looking at, right? We had like area of imbalance down here as well that we could see prices tapped into. So yeah, just a really beautiful, reaction from that zone. And yeah, by that point, basically I went ahead and told everyone like, yeah, let's go ahead, let's take partials, right? And move stops to break even. So, I know price gave one more opportunity here to take partials, right? Like somewhere down here, right? And then from there, moving stops to break even, right? Because even though obviously we had a nice reaction off of the zone and everything, right? We still want to be cautious, of the potential danger areas, right? Like for example, like these areas of liquidity, right? The area of imbalance that we had tapped into, right? So that's why it's really important, to make sure that we are managing those positions properly. So that's one thing that we did really well here, right? Whenever I get to that 1 to 2 moment, I like to take partials and then move stops to break even. And a lot of people ask me too, they're like, okay, well, doesn't that kind of mess up your potential risk to reward ideas? Well, what I normally like to do is if I take partials at 1 to 2, my next point where I'm going to be looking to like potentially close or take partials is going to be at 1 to 4, right? If I think that we could potentially like realistically hit 1 to 3, then I'll probably hold it. But if we have like again, like I said, key moments, or maybe it's just a bit of a ways away or whatever it might be, then I will like go ahead and take partials at 1 to 2, and then if we end up hitting 1 to 4, which would be like obviously us targeting these lows down here, then I would end up having one position closed up, and then I would have one position that would be up about 2%, right? So we would have about 1% that we secured from taking partials, and then we would be up 2% in floating. So in total, we'd be up about 3%. And that's where we want to be at, right? We want our risk to reward to be somewhere around like 1 to 3. So we want to average that out, right? By and while still like mitigating our risk, right? While still allowing us to be like, okay, well, I caught a 1 to 2. I can always just take a 1% win off of that, right? And then if price ends up returning back to entry or whatever, then we'll end up, hitting hitting break even for the rest, right? Which is cool. So that's kind of how I will go ahead and manage this. And obviously what we can see happen, right, at NY Open. So we can see like this is literally our 9:30 candle, right? Our 9:30 candle happened right here, right? And we ended up shooting up to the upside right at 9:30, right? So it's a good thing we managed that position, right? I think the way we took it was perfect. I think the way that we took partials was perfect, and moving that stop to entry as well. Before we ended up having like a really big rally here, we could see coming into that NY Open, right? So again, it was like with US 30, right? And I'm surprised at how long I've been yapping for this one trade, but yeah, so with US 30, like we said, like we were talking for seeing a potential type one to take sorry, type two to take place. But after we had this reaction here on the Monday of New York Open, right? It was definitely a possibility that either one, we were wrong about the distribution as a whole, which for me, like I didn't really think was true because again, like we had like even if we're wrong about the long-term sells, like I think that the lows here and the imbalances here, for me, very highly suggest that we're going to end up seeing that, pull back to the downside at least, right? At least reaching down into these levels. Especially just like how obvious that liquidity was, right? So that was what for me, like kind of had me still looking for this position after that. And so, I ended up taking another position over here, after we went ahead and like basically took the high. So we could see over here, did I take another? I don't think I did take another trade. I think that was it. In my thing I got here, I only have two US 30s. So yeah, so we ended up having price, reaching above that previous high, right? And then when we went onto like this lower time frame, I noticed this price action here where we had basically, so we could see here, this is the arrow here, right? So price like really impulsively came up to that high and then rejected really hard, right? So I was thinking like, okay, maybe we could actually end up seeing this become a point of what do you call it, like manipulation as well, right? So, maybe this can end up being like our final drive above the UT to really create our UTAT, right? That was kind of the initial idea that I had there. And so I called out another trade at around, let's see here, 10:22 a.m., right? So 10:22 a.m. is right here, right? So we had our stop just above this high. And basically what we were looking at was the fact that, we had, obviously like this push to the upside happened. So this was actually more of like a potential like type 3 setup where we were kind of thinking like, okay, maybe this can end up becoming, like a manipulation. And we're going to go ahead and enter during the impulsive phase. So we were thinking that maybe we went ahead and just took this external liquidity, right? Price came back. We ended up seeing our second point of manipulation right here, right? Where, we could see like we sold off, right? We targeted these highs and then we started to like sell back down, right? So that was kind of like where for me, I was like, all right, maybe we can end up seeing that next push to the downside, right? So yeah, I believe from this point, like we had like one more reaction, if I'm not mistaken. Here, yeah. So, I was kind of looking at this as like a potential zone here. And then, we ended up having price sell off really nicely here as well, right? For another 1 to 2 potential risk to reward, right? So, because we had this lower time frame price action here, and like if we notice here, like where I have this box marked up, right? That zone also has a really nice 3-minute candle, which was a big piece of why I wanted to take the trade because we have the initial manipulation and then we have our second manipulation that also has a really nice candle there. And on the 5-minute also has a really nice candle as well, right? So again, how can we kind of sift through these, like, the noise that happens? And it is through, like putting these time frames together and seeing like, okay, well, we have these type of institutional candles that are being created on multiple time frames, right? When we're also looking at the 1 minute, like coming above these lower time frame highs right here that were created, right? We just like poke above and then sell off. So that was like my thought process there with this idea. We ended up catching a 1 to 2, and then at that 1 to 2, we went ahead again and took our partials, right? Because that's part of our rules, and this is why we have our rules, because they, they protect us when we're wrong as well, right? So we could see here risk free, right? And then we ended up letting this, pretty much from there, we took our partials, we went risk free, and then price ended up doing one more drive to the upside, right? And yeah, funny enough, this ended up actually being the top of the market right after that, right? But the thing is, it happened just really late, like New York session. Because for me, I don't like to take trades too much when we get past like 12 noon. And as we could see, like I think like the top here is at like 12:30 or something. Or no, it's like 1 p.m., 2 p.m., something like that. Oh, no, no, I'm totally tripping. Yeah, this happened during Asian session, right? So during Asian session, we had like this final drive to the upside here, and obviously I don't trade Asian session, so that's where we ended up having like the UTAD. So again, like our idea was that, bigger time frame wise, we were seeing a distribution, right? So basically, we were looking at this as a potential like distribution type price action. But again, it's like, this is something that happens sometimes when we are looking at distributions, is we end up looking at a STM phase B, right? Or like, sorry, we end up looking at like a UT, right? Like this the second last drive, as our potential points where we can take positions. But obviously, sometimes we'll end up getting that last third high there, right? Because we can see like lower time frame wise, all of these highs are going to have their signs of manipulation inside of them, right? We have a distribution in here, we have a distribution in here, and we have a distribution in here. So we have that 3 drive push for the distro, which really gave this, a really clean potential setup. So I think that this is where the full schematic really showed itself, right? So we have over here in the images, we'll tap into this. Oh, what? Right. So basically what happened in this example, in hindsight, is like, obviously we were looking for price to become the type 2 schematic. And instead, what did we end up getting? We just ended up getting a type 1, right? Which can happen, right? Like in real time, sometimes it's like we said, it's tough to see like what's going to happen, like whether it's going to be an LPSY setup or whether it's going to be like an actual UTAD setup, where we get like this final drive happen, or do we get the drive happen, below the previous low, right? So, it's totally okay to take multiple shots, right? Like sometimes I'll go ahead and be like, okay, I'll take a position here, right? And if we do end up, coming higher, then I'll go ahead and take a position there too, in case that ends up being, a type 1, right? So yeah, so thankfully we did manage to take advantage of this sell-off as well, like in the full sense of it when we, took the trade on NASDAQ, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, we'll go into the other trades now. So hopefully that kind of makes sense there, guys. That was kind of the Monday idea there. And yeah, so we'll go back into this trade in a second. But the next trade that we went ahead and took was on Euro JPY, right? So Euro JPY ended up being a break-even trade. Okay, so we'll go ahead and look at that right over here. Would have been a loss, right? So thankfully we, managed to control our position and everything like that. But what were we kind of thinking here with Euro JPY, right? So, bigger time frame wise with EJ, I think students know is that like I've been really looking for this to see like a really big sell-off. I was really liking how we had like this liquidity down here. Let me go ahead and just go to one that we haven't marked up just so I can really do it with you guys, right? So you can see here, like with Euro JPY, we recently had price show a potential sign of manipulation on the bigger time frame. We can see here we're on the daily time frame, right? And during this moment here, we can see how price, kind of broke above like all of these highs, right? So like this high, right? All of these highs over here, right? And then, we end up breaking above all of them with that one, basically just poke up, right? So when I saw that, and then I also saw that we had like, these lows here, right, that are showing a lot of signs of liquidity on the daily time frame. I was looking for price to potentially, again, just continue to melt down towards those lows, right? There's also like a lower time frame imbalance down here that still hasn't been filled to this day. So we'll go ahead and see if we can find an entry on that this week. But yeah, so that was kind of the idea behind it. And I was looking at the potential for, this push to the upside here to be, manipulation, right? So, we kind of had like a Wyckoff accumulation that played out here. And I was looking to see like, okay, can this actually be like a redistribution where we just poke above that previous like accumulation, and then from there see the sell-off happen pretty quickly, right? And we had like two potential points of interest here, right? Because we had this initial high that happened here, and then when price came, price reacted. And then when it came back up here, we also have this really beautiful 1 hour candle, right? So I was thinking like, okay, well, now during New York session, right, we went ahead and came back into this zone, right? We also had like, if we can look here, even smaller time frame, here for a second, like, we poke up, right? We could see like price kind of stays in this relative range, right? And then kind of like pokes up above that range. So I was thinking, okay, sellers could be getting hurt here, right? So we could end up seeing maybe even this just continue the order flow that we've been seeing, right? Where we have like, low, high, low, high, low, high, to then go ahead and see if we can attack that liquidity to the downside that we were talking about. So that's kind of the idea here with this setup. And so what do we end up doing? Well, we ended up going ahead and going to this lower time frame over here, right? And I believe we took a trade inside of here, right? So we ended up having like at the moment that I took the position, it really looked like this, right? Like I think it was even here, like after that candle there. We ended up having price have like this really long wick down here, right? We had like this push to the upside, and like price was kind of like respecting that zone. We can see here on the 3 minute we have a nice up candle, right? We could see here, 5 minute wise, we were looking like, okay, maybe we could sell off as well. And then 15 minute and like 30 minute and stuff, I was like, all right, well, maybe this whole thing can be like a buy to sell motion was kind of the idea. So yeah, so we ended up taking entry, and we ended up getting like it was pretty consolidated for a while, right? We had like multiple reactions off of our area, here, right? We could see here like we had like this big wick as well. We just barely ran that wick, and then we started to come to the upside. And simply put, right, we ended up actually like closing this trade up early. Oh, right, by the way, we put our stop loss above our previous point of interest, which is right here, right? So we could see here on this lower time frame how this was a potential manipulation zone there, right? Like just one candle going ahead and poking up back above those highs. And then we end up seeing price, basically start to react off of there. So I was kind of looking to play that lower time frame there. Price ended up reacting about like 12 pips or so, right? Nothing crazy. It took a while for it to do that, but since we were, consolidating so much, and since I saw that we had just barely poked below that previous low and stuff before we came up. I was like, all right, let me go ahead and like cut off this trade once we came back to around break even. So, I believe it was like right around here, somewhere in here that we called out like, yeah, we should go ahead and close this trade. And thankfully we did, because obviously price did end up, coming up, tapping the SL there, and then, pretty much continued to it did end up like coming down eventually, like coming to like I think some pretty deep levels there. But yeah, so far, we haven't really seen that push to the downside really happen there on Euro JPY. So we could see here right there, we like poked above one more time, but like we haven't finished taking out all these lows just yet. So we'll see how this ends up playing out for the rest of the week. Because like I said, we do have like an imbalance down in here and stuff. So, still have that hard time frame idea, but price just hasn't like matched up for us with it, right? So yeah, that's gonna be our imbalanced zone right there. So if we can even end up getting like what I personally would love to see going into the future would be if we can see price just poke above all that price action, right? Literally just poke above all of it, get back into that daily zone, and then potentially looking for like a long-term swing, for this Euro JPY setup to one, obviously reach this potential imbalance here, and then two, to come down towards like all these weekly lows, and potentially even further, right? So we shall see. We shall see. But that was the idea there with Euro JPY. And again, like we managed to, really manage that position well as well. Because again, that would have been a full loss, but we managed to make that trade a break even by, just kind of looking at it and being like, okay, well, we're getting really late into the session, right? At this point, it's already 12 o'clock. And it's been not really much, right? It's been a lot of consolidation, right? We kind of been like enticing sellers, if anything, and then we were like taking out buyers. So that was kind of the price action I was noticing there. So because of that, I ended up closing this trade early, and thankfully we managed to avoid a loss. All right. So that was Tuesday of the session. All right. Then from there, we ended up going into Wednesday. This is where we had our big win, of the session, right? We ended up starting out, with a potential Euro USD entry, right? So obviously we were looking for, potential sell ideas here for a short term, right? We were kind of seeing how, price had been like building up, a lot of buyers here, to the downside, right? And then to the upside, we can see like, potential signs of manipulation. We can see there was this high here. We have like this super impulsive move coming above that high and then, coming back down, right? So that was really interesting to me, right? And then we also watched how during New York session, we had basically had price, again, really impulsively get into that zone and then react back down, right? So I was looking to kind of play this like a type one entry model where, and let me go to one that we haven't marked up actually, just so we can really do this. So yeah, so we looked at this as a potential type one right over here. Because we had price create this zone, right? We had this potential manipulation here to the upside there as well, right? So we had like really a inside of our mitigation phase, we were showing another potential manipulation phase. So I was like, okay, well, that's typically the trade that I look for, right? So, I went ahead and like took a position inside of here after like the lower time frame. I think one of the main reasons why I did it was the lower time frame here. We had like some signs of manipulation inside of that zone as well. But personally, like I wasn't too confident in the position, so I did end up leaving my stop here instead of like normally where I'd put my stop up here, and thankfully I did because it would have ended up being, again like a bigger loss. But it was also because we had like lower time frame manipulation that was showing up here as well. Like we had like these highs here that were being swept. I think that was like where I ended up taking my position was, after we had swept those highs, right? We came into profit and then price reversed, right? Honestly, we probably could have like broken even here. I think that's one way that we definitely could have done this a bit better. But there was definitely still some signs here. I mean, like, big buy up, right? We had sold back off, so it could make sense to see us continue as well. But yeah, no, there was definitely like, you know, an institutional candle here that we could see, barely took these lows there, but yeah, it was still looking relatively equal. And at the end of the day, like this ended up being like our last drive up before price actually ended up coming down to our TP, unfortunately, right? So, as we could see here, like your USD ended up making this high once again at like 130, right? So it's like really, really, not cool, man. Not cool for price to go ahead and do that to us. So yeah, that's really the idea here with this. So if we had done the bigger stop, like we would have just gotten like barely wicked out before then coming down. So, hindsight analysis with this, I think very simply, this obviously was a distribution. And once again, we ended up entering during a potential STM phase B instead of a potential, UTAD, right? And again, it's like we wouldn't like, so it's like, for me, like when we have price coming back into these zones, like especially during like 9:30, open and stuff, I lean towards this actually being, a good area of interest to play off of, right? Versus like, the alternative, which would be us creating the high at 1:30 or 1 p.m., right? Which typically is not what we want to see for our entry model, right? So that's why we went ahead and looked for the trade there. But obviously, if people had followed up on this or whatever, I think the only time we really could have followed up on it was during London, which was right over here, like after we had already started to break down, right? London gave one more entry and then gave us like, the real sell off to the downside, which would have been clean. But yeah, I mean, like what we were aiming for was those lows. This was kind of our idea here, which was this, right? And, price ended up running down really nicely from where we had our entry, like 70, 80 pips. But sadly, we got kicked out of it. But thankfully, that same session, we also did manage to take, potential sells here on NASDAQ. So, really with the same idea as like what we kind of like already rambled on about for a while with US 30, was the potential for this to be a distribution. Um, and yeah, I really liked how, for this specific NASDAQ example, we had this high, right? We had, down to this low, right? So this is kind of like our first, this is like I would call our buying climax and our automatic reaction, right? So, this is kind of like, whoops, sorry. This is kind of like our first drive to the upside, second drive to the upside, and then this would be like our third drive to the upside. And we had a really nice institutional candle inside of that area during our third drive to the upside, as we could see here, right? So let me go ahead and just bring this back to like before we even took the trade, right? And yeah, actually, let me bring it back to another pair that we haven't marked up. And so yeah, so we were looking at this as like potential like distributions, and then like the fact that we had like a really beautiful 1 hour candle here, right? We had really beautiful imbalance as well inside of that same area here. And liquidity, right? So we had liquidity sitting right here for NASDAQ, and we had this really nice extreme area. And when we look at US 30 at the same time, right, we can obviously see here that once again, like those same lows that we spoke about on US 30, they had not been taken out yet, right? So we just have like this huge gap down here, right? And we have like these relatively equal lows that US 30 isn't that hasn't played below yet, right? While NASDAQ is like again sitting at this point here where we haven't even tapped into the zone. So when price did end up very impulsively, coming above into here, right? I was looking for potential positions from this 1 hour candle. And I would say this is a pure type 2 setup because we didn't really wait for any lower time frame price action, right? We like price literally just came into our potential UTAD and we just took the trade. Yeah, so I would definitely label this as a type 2. And then, obviously at that same moment that NASDAQ was coming up to there, US 30 had just recently ran its highs over here and stuff, right? So especially when it comes to indices and stuff, guys, we like to look at both of them because they're both going to go the same way, right? NASDAQ's going to go down if it's a big move down. NASDAQ's also going to go down if it's a big move down. US 30 and S&P will also go down, right? But it's just that NASDAQ here, again, like I said, was just in a more extreme area compared to like US 30, coming right back into like that extreme high over here versus like US 30 really being like more at lows. I wasn't as confident taking US 30, so I ended up switching over to NASDAQ. And like, we could see our S&P also didn't really go ahead and take that liquidity. So that's why I was like, all right, let's go for, this potential position here. Price came really, really close to stops, right? We could see we had like one more drive up there on the 1 hour, right? Or sorry, on the 30 minute here. Price just barely came, and respected that zone. And then from there, we ended up catching a huge push to the downside, right? Like we can see that, the market in that very next candle literally moved 330 pips, in 30 minutes, right? So it was like boom, like that, and we were already like we were only risking about 50 pips or so. And so yeah, we were up about 1 to 6 risk to reward on that position pretty much instantly. So yeah, it took partials pretty much right at that moment. But like we had said, like especially since we had such an impulsive move and it was so difficult to stay in there. Let me see here, partials, right? And since it was so difficult to stay in there, right? Like I went ahead and said in the chat, like, I mean, I definitely think we can end up, reaching back down into, this gap here on NASDAQ and as well, like US 30, US 30 it filled this gap here, but, we had this zone here that didn't end up, reacting, right? Um, so yeah, that was really, the idea here, right? So, when we saw, that potential zone there for US 30, like that was a little bit lower. It really gave me the idea like, okay, yeah, most likely we will end up seeing like another drive lower, which obviously we did end up seeing, later in the week if we let this play out. But like, we had one more drive up and then from there, like a huge sell-off right after, which would have been like, at its peak about a 1 to 13, right? About 700 pips from that zone, right? So really, really big win there. Obviously in the chat, I only counted up to 1 to 6. But this trade ran for a lot more. So yeah, really, really cool to see, right? I would say this is definitely obviously the trade of the week. when it comes down to it. So yeah, that was on Wednesday. Really, really beautiful stuff. All right. Now we have GBP USD, right, which is going to be next, right? So hopefully you guys can kind of see this here, by the way, like why this trade really took place. Again, we're just following up on that example of like, we had like longer term targets, right? And this is like, I think a big example of like where we need to really focus in on having bigger time frame targets, right? Because when we do that, right, this is how we can typically find, like positions like even when they're later on, right? Like obviously here it's like price already sold off pretty aggressively, but we're still looking for sells. Why? Because we didn't hit our first target of this gap and we didn't have our second target of this gap either, right? And that's what could have helped anybody really go ahead and look at, this huge sell off on indices, right? Same kind of thing that we've been doing on dollar as well, right? Like, like one of the things that we had done for the US dollar was, we were targeting these specific lows, we were targeting imbalance downs in here. And because of that, we just continued to sell, continue to sell, continue to look for sells, right? And that's really how you guys should be going about also, with your trading is, getting yourself in a position to align your ideas with your higher time frame targets, right? So yeah, so that's really that on indices, right, for that week. And then, we ended up going into, GBP USD. So I ended up taking some short positions on this just because we were looking at some short-term liquidity. Obviously, we were kind of like, we have recently like reaccumulated here on, GU, right? So we definitely had like a reaccumulation here. But I was wondering if we could, see like just a short-term sell-off just down to these lows, and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, so basically we ended up catching a position right around here, right? So let me just go ahead and do the bar replay here, right there. And we're also going to bring this to one that we haven't marked up. Okay. This one looks weird, so we're gonna do another one. So, cool. So yeah, so just kind of like had like really nice candles in this zone here, right? We had like this nice 1 hour candle that had played out. We were starting to do order flow back down. And, we hadn't really broken this low here. So I was thinking like, okay, well, maybe even if we are going to be bearish, right? I mean, bullish, I mean, I wanted to see price at least reaching back down into like these previous areas of interest and stuff. And the lower time frame was kind of aligning with that. So we ended up having like a zone in here that we were really looking at, really this push to the upside here as a whole, right? I had noticed that during New York, like we had also, started to show like potential signs of manipulation into that zone. And then we had like a really big push to the upside here, right? All with one candle. And so yeah, we were basically just looking for this to go ahead and sell off from this previous zone here, to potentially go down and reach that liquidity, right? Obviously, the first target was for us to, really just break these lows here, right, which would have been about our 1 to 3. And yeah, price ended up giving a really, nice reaction down. We ended up being about 1 to 2 in profit. But at the time I was actually traveling, so I couldn't update the trade for us to actually like take partials at that moment, right? So, I wasn't even away for that long, like, but we can see that price really only stayed down here for about like 7 minutes or so, that I was away from my phone. So I couldn't tell people like, oh, like, let's go ahead and take partials and stuff. I did tell everyone like move stops to break even, so that's what we did. But we didn't really get the chance to take partials. So because of that, this trade went down as a break even trade in the breakdown, right? But yeah, price ended up selling off for about 20 pips. We were only risking about 10 pips. And again, we were kind of anticipating for this to just be like a manipulation of this previous high to then, obviously see the sell-off. And as we could see with what happened afterwards, price obviously came back, took us out at entry, right? Had one more drive up, I believe, right? If I'm not mistaken, here, right? And then from there, respected our stop as a whole, right? And came down to our initial target down here, right? So yeah, I think our 1 to 3 was actually like somewhere here, if I'm not mistaken. It was actually not with that low. So yeah, like it was really, really close to hitting our 1 to 3. I think our entry was a little bit higher. It was like somewhere over here. But it didn't just didn't give that zone there, right? And unfortunately we couldn't manage the position quickly enough because I just wasn't at my computer. So yeah, that was unfortunate. But after that, obviously, thankfully we ended up protecting ourselves because it definitely would have ended up becoming a loss, right? We can definitely see here how like that liquidity really started to build up though. So it was pretty clear that from there we were most likely going to see that next push to the upside happen, without like necessarily taking this liquidity and coming to our extreme area here. So yeah, it happens. And finally, guys, our last two trades of the week is USD CAD, right? So really with USD CAD, what we were thinking what could happen was the potential for this accumulation to get reactions. We had been like looking for potential like buy positions before over here, right? Price ended up doing like one more sweep down, kind of like just barely breaking it. So I was like, okay, well, when we see that kind of PA, right? Where we have like these final manipulations down that didn't really need to happen, to be honest. We typically do end up getting reactions from that zone. And I had seen how, there was definitely a lot of buyers that were being created inside of here, right? So when price came down and started to like sweep that low, basically, right? So, obviously we could see price sold off very aggressively instead, right? It looks more like it was a redistribution, right? Which we'll talk about in a sec. But the idea really just being like, okay, maybe we can end up going ahead and sweeping that low, getting back into the previous accumulation, and then from there seeing the reactions up, towards highs. But I think in this scenario, obviously, like I said, I think that the accumulation just simply turned into a distribution right here, right? And, especially when we see how like the markets just barely came above the high of the accumulation. And then from there, we started to sell off. I think that was definitely a red flag to like not take this position, not look for those zones. But yeah, obviously I did end up, going into it with that. And I think it was like over here or something. It might have been the 1 hour. No, it was definitely the 30 minute. If we let this play here, we had like a trap candle here that came down. So I was like, okay, maybe that can become an institutional candle. And then I went into the lower time frames, and I was kind of looking at like, okay, well, maybe this drive to the downside could end up being like, what pushes us up. That didn't give it to us. And then, same thing over here. I was looking at this push to the downside, right? So that's where really though, like, we took an entry here on USD CAD and we took an entry here. So in hindsight, truly, I don't think that these were positions that should have been taken. I think that definitely, just given the fact that we never really had like a good second point of manipulation, at least in this example here, should have gotten us to not take the trade, right? We should have really seen price, if we're really going to take the trade here, we should have seen price go ahead and break above the previous, highs there, right? Come down, create a second point of manipulation, right? Because again, if we're looking for institutional candle creation model, which is technically what I was looking for, right? We should have the lower time frame really react twice, right? This day as well, like on Friday, I was flying out to Cartagena. So, it was definitely like a more distracted day, I would say. Probably shouldn't even have gotten into position since I wasn't going to be able to be active on the charts. But anyways, then we did have like, this zone here happen afterwards. So I decided to take a second attempt when this happened. And then, obviously price gave a pretty nice reaction, but ended up creating another institutional candle here we could see to the downside, right? So I think our entry was like somewhere, or our stop was there. Entry was here, stop was there, right? And price came about like 10 pips in profit or so right here. But as soon as this push to the upside happened, and price started to sell off, definitely a red flag. It looks so much like an institutional candle. In that moment there on the 3 minute, we can see it as well on the 5 minute. It's a beautiful institutional candle, right? So just a huge sign to like, again, close that trade, right? But again, I was traveling and I couldn't really manage the position at that moment. And then obviously price ended up continuing to sell off while I was gone. So yeah, this is why we do our risk management, because I think that when it comes to this trade, and when it comes to both pretty much both of these like USD CAD trades, like definitely in hindsight was more of a human error than it was like, an actual setup that presented, right? Because truthfully it was like, yeah, we can have this hard time frame idea of us being like, all right, well, I want to go ahead and play in the extreme area down here. But truthfully, the lower time frame price action just didn't align for that idea here, right? And so it's a good case study to also look at and to be like, okay, well, what does the price look like when we have a zone and that zone doesn't respect, right? Typically we will have these like, moments where it's like, all right, maybe these can be institutional candles, maybe these can be institutional candles. But, looking at the later price action, for example, like this can be that clear sign to be like, all right, yeah, no, we're gonna, close these positions kind of thing, right? Because that's what it'll typically look like. We'll have like redistributions play out, which is like what this is, right? We have like a little accumulation, we do a distro, right? And then we sell off there, right? So that was kind of the idea there with USD CAD. So definitely not a trade that should have been taken, but regardless, it is what it is, right? We took our first trade at a full loss and we took our second trade at a half loss. So it was down about 1.5 R, 1.5% for that day. But overall, obviously, with the week, still ending off in profit regardless, right? But definitely, I would say once again, in hindsight, it's like should have been waiting for that lower time frame PA to go ahead and do it. And like, when we're distracted and we're out, we're traveling, probably not the best time to be trading as well, to make those decisions. Um, so yeah, it is what it is. But I think regardless, it's still a good lesson. Because although like we did take losses, I don't think they were valid losses, right? I think that this one, after seeing that institutional candle, probably should have been completely taken out. And then this one, I didn't have enough evidence to really go ahead and take that position. It was really just the fact that it came down there at 9:30. We had like a smaller time frame zone, so I was like, all right, let's go for it. But definitely not the right idea. And dollar just ended up continuing to fall off, which is funny because that was like basically our bias to start off the week anyways, right? We were looking for dollar to continue to sell off from this zone here. Um, so yeah, pretty much, those are, yeah, like you said, right? Always lessons to learn. Absolutely. Um, so yeah, guys, so that's really the idea there, with the week. Overall, great week, right? Definitely want to continue to build onto that this week and, do another call like this one to kind of review everything. But yeah, like, I think first and foremost, I think the US 30 example was really interesting because like, we managed to, again, like actually take some wins off of being wrong, right? And again, it was because we did have pretty good lower time frame price action where we wanted it to be. And obviously we ended up seeing one more high, right? And this is also just kind of speaks on like how Wycoff really looks like in the moment, right? Sometimes STM phase Bs are going to look, or STM phase Bs or UTs are going to look extremely clean for potential positions, right? Before we have that UTAD or that spring. So even if something looks really, really good, like it did over here, I thought it looked really good there, right? We want to make sure that we always have our same plan in mind, right? When we hit that 1 to 2, we're taking partials, we're going break even, depending on whether we think 1 to 3 can hit or not, right? Type of thing. So yeah, really, really good. The like I feel like the management with the positions, right, was good to make sure that we came out with some wins there instead of some losses. I think the Euro JPY close early was really good as well. I think the GU, even though obviously we could have held it and hit a 1 to 3, I still think the management was good because we did hit our 1 to 2. Unfortunately, again, like I said, we couldn't just take partials on that. So this was definitely a management week, that was necessary to protect the capital. So yeah, and to, again, like really just learn how we want to act in these market conditions because we're always speculating. At the end of the day, guys, like, we can know all the theories, right? We can know everything, but we are speculating here at the end of the day. We're creating narratives and we're seeing if we can align them with, what's happening here. So we have to obviously, not try to, like we say, get married to any position. We want to go ahead and be, as impartial as we can and always like regardless of how good a trade looks in a specific moment, go ahead and protect ourselves, right? Even if that means taking partials and maybe seeing less profits when we hit 1 to 3s or whatever, right? But taking partials of that 1 to 2 can protect you, right? Sometimes, but obviously, like that goes to each trader. That's just how I personally manage and stuff. But go in and back test it, right? That's the only thing you can do if you think it can work into your plan or not. But yeah, what I would really advise and to really get into like to just sum up everything from this week, and I think what the main lesson should be for anybody who's watching this is make sure you have management rules, right? Though that's what really created this week to be a good week is having the rules that manage it, right? So like for example, like when we I have a lot of rules that I've created just through experience in the market of being like, okay, well, this is what things look like when they typically reverse, right? This is what happens. Like, sometimes we hit 1 to 2s and we reverse and stuff, like that. So, because of that happening, I've put it into my rules of being like, okay, well, when this happens, it doesn't matter. I don't need to think about it. It's not about the situation. It's not about like, oh, how do things look? It's literally just like, this is the situation. Boom, we're taking partials. You know what I mean? Like, Like we want to have the very much so like a computer programming, like if this, then this, when it comes to management. So yeah, guys, yeah, see how you can, put that into your own rules, to, get yourself better and everything like that. But yeah, I think that's it for today, guys. Appreciate you guys watching the whole video and appreciate you guys live being on here till the end. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one. Much love, much appreciation. Peace out. Let's kill the week. Peace.